the translations. As it was this morning, you can use Vatican Vox application, and then you just select the event and you select the language and you can follow. We have the translation in Italian, Spanish and English simultaneous. Per la traduzione, per favore.
For translation, please go to the Vatican Vox app, as it was this morning. Select the event, and then you can select your preferred language, Italian, English or Spanish. You're listening to the English channel at this point, and unfortunately the speaker informs us that they cannot repeat this information in Spanish, but I think that has come through nonetheless.
Okay. So welcome to everybody. Benvenuti a tutti. I will speak in Italian, that is my mother tongue, because it's better than speaking English. To me, since you have the translation, it will be better than my English. But I can shift sometimes also to English. Parlerò in italiano.
And I shall speak Italian, which is better than my English, I believe, and you all have a translation. We have two guests of ours who speak English and others who speak both languages. So this afternoon we shall try to continue the reflection which we began last night during the liturgy, and then during the penitential mass in St. John, and then the pilgrimage this morning, and the conversations we heard pronounced by the people who are sitting at this table with me at this time, and of course what the Pope said. I will briefly ask Colum and Maria and Mario to comment what we heard. And I would like you to ask questions and actively participate, those who are around this table, for Maria and Colum, but especially my guests, not really myself. I would like there to be true and authentic conversation, sharing of reflection and histories, so that this may represent a beginning, a new start of our path as journalists. I therefore will ask Maria and Colum a comment on what they heard from the Pope, and a portion of the conversation and the speeches which has any resonance with what was listened to this morning. Thank you. I would like them to comment specifically on the topic of being true, being truthful, to be truthful rather than just simply to say the truth, to be truthful in exiting oneself, in going outwardly in communication as we encounter others, and how our work as journalists and communicators builds society. Which is, of course, a commitment, and it's something big and important vis-à-vis our vocation. And I will wait for the second question because it's not linked up to this one, but anybody wishing to ask questions may raise their hand, and there are a couple of people with roving mics, and that will make it more of a conversation and less of a lecture. Good afternoon. In order to add to something which we heard this morning, I read the speech that the Pope did not pronounce, except in its first portion, but which is in the proceedings. And there is a final element which I'm going to read out to you, and which I like very much and answers your question, I believe. And it says, tell stories of hope, stories that nourish and foster life. Your storytelling must also be hope-telling. When you tell a story of evil, leave the opportunity to re-sow what has been torn asunder, to the good which can repair what is broken. Sow question marks, sow questions, ask yourselves questions. When I am invited into schools, middle schools or high schools, many students always ask me the same question, and this impresses me because it's a question which 20 or 30 years ago would never have been circulated. How can we understand whether what we read is true or false? How can we gain information which is truthful and correct? Who can we trust? What should we be reading? And as I don't like to say, well, go and read this and don't read that, the first thing I say to them is, you need to ask yourselves questions. Every time you see something, especially something which blows up with a great scandal, a great tragic noise, and which perhaps reaches you through social media or in a WhatsApp round robin, ask yourselves a question. Stop, pause, ask a question. Is it really like this? Might it be this way? Before I join one of the two parties and say, wow, great, horrible, good, I'm in shock, or I'm in outrage, I'm going to stop and ask myself a question. Cultivate questions, foster question marks, and especially, I say, make an effort. The real answer to understand what is true and what is false, in order to form an opinion, one must work. You must struggle a bit. You must make an effort. The idea that you can gain an insight in 3 seconds is the first item of falsehood. We need to work. And that means to go and search, to go and seek. I have an item of news before me. I'm going to go and check where it was issued, where it was broadcast. Is it certified? Is somebody assigning their own reputation, their name, their face to this item of news? Is it credible? And go and check whether this item of news is confirmed, and if it's confirmed from multiple sources. Ask questions, make an effort, cultivate doubt. And then Pope Francis says, tell the story of hope, which means to see the crumbs of goodness hidden where everything seems lost. It means realizing that there are young saplings coming through when the earth is covered in cinders and ash. And the idea, therefore, is that in today's narrative, where we highlight negative things because they are more impactful in the gut reaction of those listening or watching, and therefore they have longer legs, and bad news travels more. In this world, I was saying, we only see the negative tip of an iceberg. Everything else which is going on is not part of the story. Even in the most tragic of news events, if we made an effort to give the bad news, of course, but also to say that there are some people who are trying to resolve the situation, there are some people who are attempting to struggle in order to resolve this, to address this, to find the truth. Even before tragedy, we would have the idea that there is someone I can align with, I can marry up with, I can be a party of. For example, the California wildfires. Now, they talked about this, we read it, we know Los Angeles is burning, and we have always seen stills of tragic events, and this has been and is a tragic event, sure. We talked about what should have happened, what didn't work, the potential mistakes that were committed. I did not see or hear any stories of the struggle of the fire brigades that worked 20 hours a day in order to put the fires out. I didn't hear the stories of those who were trying to find a way to save the buildings, or those who did manage to save the buildings because they did something different to what others did. And therefore we can understand and perhaps take inspiration. When the fires were brought under control, there was no work to say, how did we bring the fire under control? What can we do better next time? No. We end up putting everything on trial. It's a horrible disgrace. Let's find the guilty party rather than find a solution. Whose fault it is it? And naturally, this is always somebody who belongs to a different political party. And therefore, I believe that when I read this phrase, look out for the young shoots coming up through the ashes, when I read this phrase, I think that's exactly what we need to do when we try to imagine a different world. Thank you. Thank you, Mario, as I give the floor to Maria. I would like to highlight how the Pope, who often reminds us that communication is about everybody, not just professionals, how he highlighted today the importance of those who carry out this task professionally, and therefore they have first-hand experience of this life. And I'd like to read a passage which is on the bulletin, but which we did not hear because the Pope didn't read it. But it is an answer to what Maria said, because Maria won't have the English version and won't have heard it. And he writes, I would then like to remember along with you all those who are imprisoned just because they have been faithful to the profession of journalist, photographer, videographer, and for having wished to go and see with their own eyes and tell the story of what they saw. And there are many in this holy year, in this Jubilee of the world of communication. I ask to those who have power that they are freed, that all journalists who are wrongly incarcerated are freed, and even for them a door may open through which they may return to freedom, because the freedom of journalists makes the freedom of all of us grow. Their freedom is freedom for each one of us. Over to you, Maria.
Well, I was just quoting the Pope when in the written text he's saying that every journalist that is in prison just for having tell the truth has to be free, and that their liberty is the liberty of each one of us. It's not just their freedom, is the freedom of each one of us. And then the speech continues about the importance of freedom of press and the freedom.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, as always, Pope Francis has actually been ahead of the curve, both in terms of the technology. Father Paolo Benanti, I think I had met him quite early on, and then Pope Francis's New Year's message was all about artificial intelligence. When two Vatican reporters, when you gave an award to them, Pope Francis said something that very few outside our industry actually say. He said, journalism is a mission. It is as much of a mission, and in many of our cases, it's a religion in that way. Not that we replace God, but God works through us. And then I guess the last part in that is that in the last 2 years, the number of journalists killed have increased. Last year alone, 75% of those who were killed were in Gaza. So the conflict areas of the world have gotten worse. In today's, I had brought up the case in Georgia, where Maria Globelli, you've had almost 60 days, I think today is the number of protests, mass protests in Georgia. And this is electoral fraud, a Russian-style law that the population is protesting. She's in prison, and it is her 14th day where she's on a hunger strike. Her friends, the organization, the news organization she founded, they're asking her to eat. And she said, I am on a hunger fast because if I don't do something, then I am part of it. So it goes to that. I think Pope Francis speaks, and this moment is an extremely dangerous time for the world, because naming and shaming no longer works. For all of us in the past, part of the reason that we lived together better in governance is because if someone is violating a law, if someone is being a bully, people will stand up and call them out, right? Naming and shaming no longer works in this day and age. It's just lost in the cacophony, and oftentimes those who speak the most, the extreme 6%, are the ones who dictate what we say and think. I'll just end with like one thing I didn't have a chance to say earlier, which is a 10-point action plan. I gave recommendations for what each of us can do, because if we don't act, I really am afraid we're at that same moment 80 years ago where the world, let me put it this way, 80 years ago after Hiroshima, enough people got together to stop the destruction of the world. I know this sounds very dramatic. I guess that's my TV background. I'm being dramatic in that sense, but this is the same moment. This time around, we're at that same moment. There is a survey coming out of youth from the One Young World that shows you that the youth's greatest concern right now is actually nuclear war. How crazy is that? Anyway, so 300 Nobel laureates, civil society groups, faith groups signed something. We released it 2 years ago. Dmitry Muratov, my co-Nobel laureate, Peace Prize winner from 2021, and I, along with a lot of different groups, came up with a 10-point action plan that I'll summarize in just 3 points. The first, stop surveillance for profit. Right? Surveillance for profit is taking all of our data, cloning every person in this room that is on a social media network. You in data is more than 2,300 different sets of data points that machine learning uses to clone you, and then artificial intelligence comes in and uses that to micro-target your weakest moment to a message. And then they sell it to a company or country. Right? That's the insidious manipulation. So the first is stop coded bias. The first is stop surveillance for profit. The second is stop coded bias. And when we say coded bias, it's that each of the platforms are coded, right? Who coded them? In many instances, the major ones up until TikTok were Silicon Valley creations. The new form of colonialism is actually imported into the rest of our countries around the world. So what's coded bias? An MIT student who's come out with a book in a film called Coded Bias, her name is Joy Bulamwini. She is a Black Canadian Kenyan woman. When she was at MIT, she was given an artificial intelligence assignment, and when she was looking at the computer to try to do the assignment, it couldn't see her face because she's Black and she's a woman. So she had to put on a white face, and then she could do the assignment. So what is coded bias? This is the second point. If you are a woman, if you are marginalized in the real world, an ethnic minority, if you are LGBTQ+, you are further marginalized online in the code. So that's the second point, stop coded bias. And then finally, the last one brings to the Pope's response, and thank you for reading that. We must get it out, because I think we need help. Journalism, real journalism, as an antidote to tyranny. I had a 26-year-old reporter, her name is Pia Renada. Rodrigo Duterte, the president, was hovering over her, almost took the mic away from her, and yet this young woman kept asking him the toughest questions in the nicest of ways. Journalism as an antidote to tyranny. Please don't lose faith in your journalists. We have been attacked in many ways, but we also will stand up and hopefully get you the answers you need to live your lives better. Thank you.
Grazie Maria, grazie.
Thank you, Maria. And so please prepare your questions, but I would like to get back to what the Pope said in his address today, because they also resound, I think, of what Colum said, because when the Pope says communicating is to reach out of oneself to give something of mine to our neighbor, and so communication is not just reaching out but also communicating with the others, getting in touch with them. So I think that this is what you were talking about. The sharing of storytelling is what really the Pope spoke about. And please, the floor is yours.
Excuse me. Thank you for those beautiful answers and questions. Yeah, we're at an extraordinarily important moment, I think. And just to respond to your question, I want to tell you a story instead. In 2014, a young journalist was killed in Syria. His name was James Foley. Virtually everybody in this room was there in a way, because we saw it on our machines. It's that iconic photograph of a young man in an orange jumpsuit with a man beside him in a black balaclava, and James Foley was beheaded by ISIS in August of 2014. 7 years later, his mother, Diane Foley, went to see her son's killer. So the killer, who was a British-born jihadist, was captured in Syria, taken to the United States, not shipped off to Guantanamo, surprisingly, because that horrible system in Guantanamo, they stopped it and they actually were going to put him on trial. Part of his trial, or part of his plea agreement, he pleaded guilty to torture, he pleaded guilty to conspiracy to murder, conspiracy to kidnap. And another part of his plea agreement was that he would talk to the victims or the families of victims. And this 73-year-old woman, Diane Foley, put her hand up and said, "I want to talk to my son's killer." People around the world were shocked by this. I had the great privilege of being able to accompany her. We went into a courthouse in Virginia, into a room about this size, and it was full of, there was police there was FBI, there was CIA, there was lawyers for the prosecution, lawyers for the defense, and then there was Diane Foley, and then there was a man at a table in a prison jumpsuit with shackles on his ankles. And Diane Foley walked across that room and she stood in front of him and she said, "Good morning, Alexander. It's nice to meet you." And for me, all the oxygen was gone out of the air the moment that happened. I thought it was truly extraordinary. We spent the next 2 days with Diane and her son's murderer. And she asked him, "Who are you? Why did you do what did you do? What do you believe?" And then she also said, "Let me tell you about my son. You know, my son did this, that, and the other thing." And it was one of the most beautiful things that I've ever experienced. In the end, she's a woman of deep faith and deep conviction. In the end, she forgave him, and they actually shook hands with one another. And part of this extraordinary story is also an ordinary story, because she says, "I'm an ordinary woman. I'm a nurse practitioner, and I did what a lot of people would have done." But she needed faith, she needed stamina, she needed desire, she needed resilience in order to do these things. A lot of the world would push back against her and say, you should exact revenge. But she did not want to turn justice into revenge. What she did was she turned justice into a moment in which we could all learn, and I got a chance to tell that particular story. But Diane Foley entered into the world of somebody else with grace, with style, with humility, and she learned to listen. And this goes to Pope Francis's point about storytelling, and the ability to listen to other people. In relation to Mario's point as well about questioning, which I think was really extraordinary. What is true? How do we know what is true? I saw people try to distort what Diane Foley said. But what is true? Well, we teach our young people to ask the questions about that. But also, as well as that, we have to tell the truth over and over and over again. It doesn't work just once. We have to do it constantly. For the repeated lie sometimes becomes the truth. And a lie goes halfway around the world before the truth even gets its shoes and socks on in the morning. Right? Mark Twain said that. But it is our responsibility, even in the face of people saying that it is useless, it is our responsibility against despair to risk ourselves and to tell these stories over and over and over again. Because in the deep end, I think that the truth will actually win out if we are strong enough to fight against the despair of the silence that's foisted upon us.
Grazie, Colum.
Thank you. Thank you, Colum. And if you agree, we can start with your questions or with your sharing, if you want to share a story, an anecdote, because they can be helpful for each and every one of us to look further and to try and understand what is the challenge that lies before us. Or even Mario may share something like the story of James Foley. Perhaps some of you know the story of his family, but there are colleagues who do not, because, and I don't know if Colum knows the story, he is a witness of the story thanks to his mother, and this has also become part of his storytelling. Mario, if you want to tell us, but don't feel obliged. But I would like really this to be a moment of practical sharing, not just theory, because journalism is made up of concrete choices made every day, and some of us, not all of us, and I'm also saying this to the benefit of Maria and Colum, as you can see, we come from different countries. Some of us are involved in institutional communication, others are journalists on the field. So also the challenges are not exactly the same, but we are a part of this challenge, which consists in trying to tell the truth with gentleness and, as the Pope says, with a view to freeing our hearts. And moments like this really help us take a step further. So I'm going to give the floor to Mario, and then, of course, please don't be shy. And I don't think there are people who are as shy as I am, so I'm sure that you will be taking the floor.
Mario dice di lasciare spazio.
So Mario says that we should take a question. There is a gentleman in the audience. He shall receive a microphone.
Stories, you want to pose a question to some of us? And...
Hello, I'm Kim from the Philippines, and I'm a religious brother of the Opera Don Calabria, based in Verona, Italy. My question is for Mary, and we've been talking about real journalism, and real journalism needs not just real journalists or communicators, but also a courageous one in order to communicate the truth, or I would say with capital letter T. My question is how to become courageous and where to get that courage. Thank you.
Sabi ko na nga ba, Pilipino yan eh. Sorry, I said, the Filipino will ask that question. The easy answer, and this is something a journalist would normally not say, love. That's the easy, glib answer. But it's also really true. So let me answer your question in two parts. The first is that all around the world today, from the time when I became a journalist, this is my 39th year as a journalist, right? 39 years. The risks of calling it a spade, of calling Rodrigo Duterte a liar when he was lying, right? We were the first to do that in the Philippines. The costs have increased. I think I had an arrest warrant soon after that. But and this is now happening. I think American media is not quite ready for this, but what has happened in the Philippines is happening now very quickly in other parts of the world. After the US elections, I would say that's the Philippinization of American politics. We've lived through it, and to see it happening again is Joseph Conrad, the horror. So the first is for the journalists. It's easy for the journalists, the journalists who live according to a standards and ethics manual. We expect that this would happen, and you prepare for it. And the advice I had given other journalists like us in the Philippines is embrace your fear. This is in How to Stand Up to a Dictator, because if you embrace your fear, you think through what is the worst thing that could happen if you do the right thing. And then you prepare for it. And in our case in Rappler, we drilled it. We workshopped it. And what was the worst thing that could happen? Two things. It was a shutdown, or it was violence of some sort. So we drilled it. Like, we literally ran drills every quarter. And if we had gotten shut down, everyone knew exactly what to do, and we would have done it. We got it down to minutes. That's the first for the journalist. So journalists, got to be prepared, right? Prepared for the worst. It's the serenity prayer. I'm very simple in my prayers. For the people, our community, the people who need facts, where in my country we have an average of 20 typhoons every year, talking about the LA fires. When those typhoons happen, information, facts, is the difference between life and death. Do you know where to evacuate? Do you know when to evacuate? Do you know where the flooding, where it will hit? So, for our people, our communities, the first is an awareness that you are in an environment that is manipulating you, that is shifting your view of the world, that is using your fear, your anger, and hate. So that was part of what we saw in the Philippines. 90 hate messages per hour, that was insane. But for our community who supported us, they were afraid, as we were, right? You embrace your fear, but they also found community. We talked to each other. This is why the first thing to say that I said in the 4 suggestions is collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Find like-minded, the people with values, this entire gathering, the Jubilee, what you have brought us for. We believe in God. We believe in the same things, these values that underpin many of our democratic governments. So how do you find courage? You're not alone. Find your community. The solution to the loneliness, to the epidemic of loneliness is community. The community that has been broken because trust has been broken. I think this is one of the things Pope Francis does well. He restores trust, right? I think it's amazing that the Dicastery has journalists kicking off the Jubilee when journalists have been sometimes relentless in investigating the church, right? So it's to all of our good. I guess long answer to your question, but don't think about it as courage. That was the last thing I was going to say, the third part, which is that that was always the question when I kept getting arrested. That was 2019. And I just said, it's not really courage. This is who I am. This is who you are. You have to draw the line on your values, where on this side you're good and you cross and you're evil. So you draw the line and you hold the line. Tim Snyder would say, don't voluntarily give up your rights, right? Or I think he has a different phrase for it. I just say, don't voluntarily give up your rights. Courage is the sum of so many things in each of us that ultimately just ends in one action point. Put your foot in front of each other, one step at a time.
Grazie.
Thank you, Maria. I think that it's such a good question that perhaps I can ask Mario and Colum if they wish to add something and say something about this theme of courage.
When I was talking this morning, I talked about journalists and teachers, and again, in relation to answering this question, how about we as a society start instituting some respect for our teachers and some respect for our journalists too? It's time. I will tell you this, I travel a lot, and a lot of you may not see this in the world, but if you go to an American airport these days, you'll hear, as people are getting on the plane, anybody on active military duty or anybody with an active military ID, please board the plane first. You hear this all the time. I have nothing against that. It is not my place to say whether or not what they're doing is good or bad. Well, maybe it is, but I'm not going to make a moral judgment on that. A lot of these people do really good things, but I cannot wait until the day that you show your teacher's ID, or imagine if you showed your journalism card and you were able to get on the plane first. And maybe this also applies to people of the cloth, the men and women of the cloth. Maybe this, if we begin to respect these people who are helping serve us in some extraordinary way, we will begin to turn the tide and the temperature around all these things, and then the courage will come up from underneath. And so the courage will come from respect, decency, and recognition of what people do.
Direi solo una...
I would only like to say something. How do you find courage? Well, if you love your credibility, and if your credibility is close to your heart, so if you think, I want to be a credible, reliable journalist, I want to be a honest journalist, a consistent one, I want to be able to show my face, and I don't want to be ashamed of my face. Well, this is going to give you courage, because you are afraid or you are concerned, you should reach a compromise. At that very time, if you think, well, now whether this be wrong, if this compromise, which now seems to me to be easy, then is going to undermine my credibility, which is something that we should try and protect for the whole of our lives, well, then if we have faith in what we believe in and in our credibility, then we find the necessary courage to do what we have to do or want to do. I would just like to add something very brief. It seems to me that an answer to your question was also given by the Pope in his address today, when he said, well, the Pope already knew that you were going to ask this question, so he anticipated you. This is a joke, of course. When he said, Father, I always tell true things, but are you true? It's not the things that you say, but in your life, are you true to yourself? Well, I think that we can find courage if we are true, and we are true if we are able to confess that we are weak. Today we celebrate the conversion of St. Paul, a great father of the church, but we also know his story. We know how it taught us that when we are weak, it's when we are the strongest. And this leads us to say what Maria was also saying about building a network, being a communion, be grounded on truth, even in our small role, and also rely on the others to give us strength. And another thing I wanted to say is the following. There is a risk, I think, in the wrong interpretation of what courage is, and the intention to assert our own truth, not that of God, our own, and that is to brandish it as if it were a weapon with which to strike the others. And the Pope says we must listen to the others, give us as a gift to the others. And he says courage also lies in letting go of ourselves and in sharing truth in this humble way. So there is a risk otherwise that we become, that we end up believing that we want to build the heaven on earth, the paradise on earth, and we end up building a totalitarian state. So I think that a good journalist must also have this humility in sharing his or her truth, and that this is an act of courage. The worst thing is journalists who think that they know everything and that they want to impose this. We know that there are such people in our own countries. So I just wanted to add this. If there are further questions.
Sono una qui, un'altra qua, un altro qui, un altro.
Quite a few questions around. I will be very quick, but I wanted to finish the quotation by Mario Calabresi. I hope everybody can read it, because I'd like everybody to be inspired, and the story of the father of Giulia Cecchettin, which was a case which in Italy was a female femicide. And as Maria reminded us, we all have the power of choice. Power means free will. And in every situation, even the most painful, like when a father loses his daughter, we are able to choose between vengeance and love, and anything which makes our love become more opaque. Thank you. I'm not sure whether anybody wishes to comment about this. I think everything has been said, and these are two excellent suggestions, two books which we can share, two stories we can share in order to understand how to emerge from darkness without a desire for vengeance, trying to change the sign of our stories. Thank you very much.
I am Sister Jean from the Philippines and from the Congregation of Little Missionaries of the Sacred Heart. I ask these questions because one child asked me, Sister Jean, are you praying for peace? How come still war existing? So that is the premise. And my questions are, many times it's really easy to say, but it's really hard to do. Now, telling and listening stories in this world where it seems difficult to spend more time and everyone wants instant way, where many loses hope and various desperate cases, where war seems no ending and an ending situation is still happening. Seems evil prevail over good. Does this mean that battle between good and evil endures until the end of the world? And today, in what concrete way we face all this precariousness of life? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to answer, Maria?
Sorry, sister, what was the question in the at the end?
the very end.
Just at the tail end? Do you mind saying it again?
Actually, I have many questions. So this is about, it seems it's very difficult to go out from difficulties because of the instantness of today's generation and where there is no more hope and a lot of precariousness. So how do you think there is an end between this battle between good and evil? How is it that we spend more time in prayers, but seems war is unending? And so I know that you have said a lot of things, but in a concrete way, facing all these kind of personalities, how we can answer to those questions?
So first, I think I've said often today that this moment is different, right? This is a very different time where we are literally given our own personalized realities. That's personalization of the tech. So imagine if every single person in this room on your feed is given the reality you want. That's personalization. If that were really the case and we're in the real world, this would be an insane asylum. We cannot all have a personalized reality. We live together in our shared reality. So my response, sister, is that this is a difficult moment. And it is a moment very similar to, I pointed to World War II. I don't think it's necessarily good versus evil, in the sense that many people don't realize that the acts, again, this search for individualism, in some cases for the younger generation, they live a performative life on these platforms. Imagine when you spend your life on this, waiting for approval. It's like never leaving high school in a popularity game, right? Like, how do they find meaning? So, sorry, it's a long-winded answer to your question, which is that the more difficult the time, the more important it is to have your community. And that community, sister, I think sounds like it includes you, right? Giving up hope is not an option because we don't want to accept the world as it is right now. In the 39 years that I've been a journalist, this is the worst. This is the first time. At the end of last year, I was just saying, oh my God, I've never seen the world in as bleak a phase. And I would again say, in the Philippines, we've moved from hell to purgatory. So we are moving up. We want to get up beyond purgatory. And we can, but we cannot give up hope. And I think that's part of the reason why we keep doing our jobs. Journalists keep doing our jobs. And from what I think, what Paolo had said, that journalists are hard-headed. We're pragmatic. We don't want to be seen as sentimental. We don't want to necessarily be seen... we've been taught to be a certain way. Colum can say this. I think this is the time where journalists are also forced to look at ourselves and redefine. I'm still not directly answering your question, am I? Which is, we can't give up. There's just absolutely no option. And hope is all about building and finding your community. Remember the 4 things I had said earlier. Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Our values. I believe people are basically good. So if we do and we continue to work together, I was looking at the hall this morning. If every single person there took their family and friends, which is the way these apps work, and worked in the same direction, if we demanded better from here, if you demand truth, facts from the people who govern you, and you give them the respect and the gentleness to respond, because sometimes that we also forget, then we can make it better. On the last question on the journalists, it's not that it's not just the journalists who have to be courageous now. The institution is so weakened that we need you, civil society, the Catholic Church. We need people of faith who believe that this will be better. We need to work together.
Thank you, Maria. Colum,
Briefly, for evil to exist, it need only happen once. For good to exist, it has to happen over and over and over again. That's one of the major differences. And that's where hope exists actually in difficulty. And I got in trouble yesterday for quoting Gramsci in the Vatican. Those of you, well, some of you will know what I mean. But I'm going to quote Spinoza now. And Spinoza says, "All things excellent are as difficult as they are rare." And one of the things that we're going to have to do, if we're really going to do something beautiful and profound, is embrace the difficulty of what we have to embark upon, no matter whether we be journalists or teachers or faith or writers or artists. And the second thing I have to say about what Maria was saying so beautifully is that not only do we need the journalists, but we need brave readers. We really need brave readers who call out for a form of truth. Because you can't just make the journalists say they're like that, but we need everybody, this vast democracy, to come together and demand excellence. And that will change things too.
Thank you, Colum. There was another question over there.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. My question links back to this dialogue, being brave. I worked and followed missions in my country, Mexico, and drug trafficking, unfortunately, is a very deep wound in our country. The poorest people are those who suffer most these situations. I wanted to show the dimension of truth in our missionary communities, but the sisters are afraid. The persons who are brave, and I tried to be brave, we asked them to give a witness. These are people who suffer because they live in this predicament. The sisters themselves don't want to publish anything. They don't want news to spread about these topics. And therefore I said, I'm going to stop. That's enough. I don't know what to do. On the one hand, I would like to publish something because I realize that if we do not show what is happening and the official news outlets won't do it, I am a woman religious and I want to create only real news. And I did carry out a real news array of what's happening in my area. I work in the field of education, but now I stopped because I wondered what we can do in order not to endanger persons and institutions. I want to be brave, but I don't want to expose all our work to risk, nor do I want to expose persons to risk. Who wishes to respond to this question? What can we do in order to not expose others to risk when we take risks?
The toughest thing to deal with, and we just lived through something like this. Hello. Fear works. It does. And, in the Philippines, again, it was the same thing. The biggest casualty in our battle for facts is the number of people killed in our brutal drug wars in the time that Rodrigo Duterte was president. And to give you it went from what the police said, which was about 8,000 people in the entire time that he was president, to what our Commission on Human Rights, the head of who has since died, he said in the first 3 years that there were 28,000 people killed. We kept a running tally on Rappler, and it kept changing. This is how it is so hard to nail down the facts. But here's the thing. This is part of the reason you need the community, right? Because the fear is infectious. But at the same time, if the community comes together to begin to protect each other, there's a chance that can be. Here's what happens if you don't take the risk. It will get worse. It will just get worse. I think this is why journalists do our jobs. And again, here's the other part we haven't mentioned all day. The level of corruption that it's both in governance, kleptocracies, and in media has increased significantly again, right? So there were journalists who were paid not to. They were on payrolls. So sister, oh my gosh, again, I try to be succinct, but it's so difficult. This goes down to your own factors, your appetite for risk. And the thing is this, when one person stands up, I think you'll see this also in terms of how a government deals with you. When one person stands up, it's easy to hammer that. There's a saying in Japanese and Indonesia, the nail that stands up gets the hammer. But if 1,000 nails stand up and there's only one hammer, then it's a bit easier. They can't hammer that fast. I mean, look, in Rappler, I just stood up so that my team could keep doing their jobs because it was a calculated risk. I was Filipino and I am American. And I had enough resources that I felt I could protect myself. I just didn't expect to ever have been arrested. And then the world turned upside down, right? So sometimes it goes back to your vision of the world, your appetite for risk, and the community you can form around you. The more quiet we are, the more we succumb, the more we let evil happen. Silence is consent. And I will say at some point in the Philippines, I was like, why are we alone? Where are all my other friends? Where are the business leaders? We're seeing this now in the United States as well, right? But it gathers momentum. I think the hardest part is to not even try.
Thank you, Maria. Anyone wants to add? You want to add something? Please.
So I would agree with everything that Maria said about silence being consent, and all it takes for evil to flourish is for good people to remain silent. I will tell you that I'm from Ireland, but I live in the United States right now, and there is a fear beginning to gather. I can see it in academic institutions, I can see it amongst writers and amongst artists, and you see all these business people who are flocking to worship at the feet of power, and it's very chilling. And I just hope that there's going to be people who are strong enough and brave enough to stand up and become a nail, and then you create then the army of nails, it's a powerful question. I don't want my kids to be harmed. I don't want myself or any of my friends to be harmed. But if we do it together, there's something. There's a strength in that sort of unity.
In Rappler, I have 3 other co-founders. There's 3 women, so the 4 of us were there. And there are times it was really frightening. And so we created this, it's almost a game. You have to pass the fear. Only one of the 4 of us could be afraid at a time. So we passed the fear literally like a rubber ball. And that actually really helps. Gallows humor helps also.
Oh, and I want both of you to speak too, but I just want to say a lot of it comes down to women as well. In the Northern Irish peace process, it was the Coalition for Women who started so much of what happened. So when we're talking about mothers, sisters, and so on, a lot of this protest is going to come from you women. Thank you.
The church. Sorry. And the church, right? Like the social justice has always been pushed. I mean, that's why. You should say that. You should say it better.
No, you already said it. And also the church. Yes, the church stands up, and the church is a communion where we can find the force to being members one another every time. And when we fail to do it, we are missing the occasion to testimony. The testimony of the church has always been like that. So there was another question there.
Thank you very much. As professionals in communication here, we often think about external communication, right? Especially Catholic, go share the truth. Have courage to share the truth. But how do you find that peace when you encounter internal communication challenges? And when I say internal communication challenges, mean with your peers or even with yourself. Because I do think that when we don't have that kind of peace, my message is going to come across differently to my audience, which that's what we want. We want to share the truth too as well, so it's going to have an impact. So how do you find that peace? I mean, Maria, you were one of the great example, how many times you say yourself arrested. How do you find that peace on and on and on and on, knowing that maybe you encounter some internal challenges within your job, or even us as professional communications too as well?
I think I was very lucky in Rappler. I don't know if I would have been given the same leeway. I mean, when the government issued the first shutdown order, we've had like several already and we're still alive, so we're very lucky. So the first time I forgot to actually tell our lawyers, and we called a press conference because it was just so unconstitutional. How do you find the peace? It depends on your organization, right? I do understand how some news organizations, for example, are going to try to find balance. That's the right balance, right? There is no balance in some ways. This is what we learned in the Philippines. And so, but yet, it could be the business survival of the organization. And you're seeing this play out in some of the American news groups. In the Philippines, it was the same thing. Corporate media tends to have to play that line. And so I'll tell you how we pulled everyone together in Rappler. That's easiest. I think that would be we only have about 100, 120 people in Rappler. And the minute we got the first shutdown order, I called a meeting because it's different, right? And you have to call a spade first internally so that you're not kind of walking around it, you're not walking on eggshells. We could get shut down tomorrow, you could get targeted, you're very young, and you can leave. Like, that was really it. In that first meeting, I said, anyone who wants to leave Rappler, because we're entering a new time, we will help you get a job somewhere else. Not one journalist took that. And so what happened was when it got really bad, the mission drove us. It was incredible. So again, you won't, the fear will always be there, but the way to handle fear is to embrace it. Prepare for the worst, and because you're prepared for the worst, everything is easy. Because this battle is mental. It's spiritual. So you have to replenish. And then the second thing that happened was we learned to trust each other in ways that, in many ways, that I never thought would be possible. I never felt alone. Even though I joke that I would have been the only one to go to jail for over a century in our team. But, it was, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And we come out better. Republica, go Mario!
He will say something at the very end. He's just meditating on. He wants to be straight to the point. I can say something. Una cosa sulla comunicazione.
A couple of things. One on institutional communication, which is something that was somehow referred to by you in your words. I think that a mistake that the church must not make is that of considering herself an institution just like any other, communicating as though we're a government, a political party, a corporation. This is sometimes what we think, like the solution may seem to be a better marketing campaign, but relationships can be frail, as in the case of trade relations, and this is not what we want. I think that the Church of institutional communication must work on what Maria was describing concerning Rappler. In other words, building a relationship, a strong relationship, something that is not just sharing a message by a bishop, a cardinal, or a lay person, is to build a relationship. And that work is something that we should do more and better. Is humble work, is being let's say, a platform. In the gospel we read about good soil where to sow seed for it to sprout. Another thing I would like to say is that another temptation, so to speak, that we sometimes have as a church, which is thinking that we must build everything as though we were talking about the Catholic media, Catholic communication, but then there are many lay Catholic persons and men and women religious who must also be the salt in the other means of communications that are not necessarily those of the church, because when Pope Francis says the church that reaches out, it refers to this as well. So in our communication about the church, I think we should be always considering these two different extremes. So being able to build relationships that go beyond ourselves. So we must not limit ourselves to our comfort zone as Catholics who are happy together. And this is a temptation that also the apostles had to deal with, so we're not alone. And Jesus said, no, you should reach out to everybody. And that's how Christianity was born. And today we're celebrating St. Paul, so we can find some really beautiful things in his story.
Okay. Other question?
A question over here, and then there is somebody on the other side of the audience who would like to contribute to the discussion.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anam Gill, and I'm a freelance journalist from Pakistan. And as a woman coming from a Christian minority, practicing journalism in a country, authoritarian country like Pakistan, writing on socio-political issues, it was very difficult. And now I am based in Germany, Hanover, and working for World Communion of Reformed Churches as a communications coordinator. But journalism is something which I thought was my ikigai. Like, I wanted to write, I wanted to speak up and, speak truth to power, like you said. And then I was, intelligence agencies in Pakistan came up, and they would start asking questions and, start linking me, thinking that I am an agent from India or something. So in these kind of hostile environments, my question to you is that, Maria, that you have faced significant legal challenges and attacks on your freedom in the Philippines. So for journalists working in authoritarian environments like Pakistan, what practical advice would you offer in terms of maintaining journalistic integrity while navigating such hostile landscapes? Thank you.
Well, first, thank you for the work that you do. It has gotten significantly harder. I have a lot of lawyers. You must know Amal Clooney and Keelan Gallagher, along with the Covington Group, are pro bono lawyers for Rappler. They're now, because lawfare is recognized as a weapon that is being used against journalists, please, if you're a journalist under legal attack, I know where you can go for help. I think the second thing is safety first, right? That is really hard to tell a journalist from Mexico or from Pakistan or at some point from the Philippines. But we know our countries the best, right? So for me, in terms of risk, I could stay in the Philippines. And there were things I didn't know. Then I wake up to the serenity prayer. I control the things I can. So I think safety first is the first. The second is, if you have to leave, Dmitry Muratov was forced to leave Russia. Well, he goes in and out, but he was forced to shut down Novaya Gazeta. We keep working. How do you keep doing that? The next step, the next question is going to be, so how? What resources? That's going to get even harder this year, right? Because a lot of the philanthropic money is drying up. The about face of the CEOs of these huge companies is now, it's almost like a mask is slipping, and we're walking into a new era where it is okay to be cruel to each other. And that's the reason I really wanted to come to the Vatican this time. So it's so complex, and always, you must make sure you and your family are safe. It's the same advice for all the people demonstrating still in Georgia. But I will say this, whatever you choose to do, we can't accept the cruelty and brutality, the normalization of hate. We cannot accept that as a given. And you don't have to be a journalist to fight against that, right? even if the government says it's okay. That's going to happen in the US now. Even if it's normalized, even if you're in this morning when I was talking about, even if you're the only one who is saying that, I was thinking of Jesus, being crucified, right? Or well, I even found these Bible quotes. It's been a long time since I read the Bible to look for these quotes on disinformation and having to hold the line to stand up. Not all of us can be brave if you have kids. I was actually lucky in that sense. I don't have children. It would have been significantly harder to do what I did if I had children to protect. So in that sense, I felt like I could get run over if I stepped off the curb in Rome. So that's what I mean about risk. It's individual. So if you can't stay working, support the ones inside. If you can't be the nail that stands up, help others that do. At the very least, be kind and spread love.
Yeah, don't give up. And a lot of the great thinkers towards the end of their lives, philosophers, there's numerous ones, writers, artists, and they've been asked, what do they learn about life? And you expect some sort of long, complicated answers. But many, many, many of them, including Isaac Asimov, Toni Morrison, people like that, towards the very end of their lives, they all said, be kind, be kind, be kind.
Grazie Colum. C'era.
Thank you, Colum. There are a couple of raised hands at the back.
Forse possiamo.
Perhaps because we are reaching the end of our meeting, we can collect some questions.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Sister Lando from Nairobi, Kenya. Now, most of us in this audience are communicators, but Catholic communicators working for either bishops' conferences at national level or at regional level or beyond. And so from morning I've heard a lot about authenticity, about integrity, about being truthful and factual. What advice can you give us, communication communicators within the Catholic Church, where our call is to proclaim the truth, Jesus Christ himself, and to evangelize through the different means of communications that we have? But we are surrounded by the same challenges that you are talking about. So as we talk about the other world, journalists in the other world, we need to remember ourselves as Catholic communicators within the church, but in the world. So sometimes we have the challenges of also wanting to get the hits on our website. We also have challenges of vulnerability, presenting stories maybe in less ethical ways, and also trying to remain relevant. So, you people are experienced, and I've learned a lot from you. But what can you tell us? How can you encourage us, Catholic communicators within the Catholic Church, to remain factual, to remain credible, and to remain to the cause despite the challenges that we have mentioned? Because sometimes we fear to be left behind. If I don't also splash a certain picture, I might not get the likes. If I do not maybe have a certain headlines, I might not get the coverage that is being looked for. Yet, the secular media, more often than not, looks up to us in order to get the truth. So how can we remain standing as Catholic communicators? Thank you.
So I just tweeted. So I think the first thing is, please understand that the platforms do not reward facts. They don't reward good behavior. So I know that we are all still on social media, but I would suggest this. Look at the communities that are here and begin to organize yourselves as a distribution network, right? Like if you work in this would be in marketing, they look at this and they work on it on a daily basis. I'll tell you what we did in the Philippines. In 2022, I was tired of getting pummeled. And, you know, if you follow the platforms, if you're on these platforms, they will tell you something different every day. We're like free labor for them. And then they just keep getting the money, right? And our behavior keeps getting worse and worse. Because the kind of journalism that gets the widest distribution on these platforms are not the best. They're the worst. So what we did was in 2020, I would have started it earlier in 2021, but the Nobel got in the way. But we started something called #FactsFirstPH, which is, and I just tweeted it on X. I'm sorry to send you there, but we use it for what it is for now, right? So we took about 150 different organizations in 4 layers, a 4-layer pyramid, 16 news organizations doing fact checks. We did this in partnership with the Google News Initiative because they gave us funding to be able to pull everyone together. So 150, 16 news groups doing fact checks. We know fact checks don't spread, right? The lie will spread really far, but the fact checks don't. The second layer is civil society. It was the business clubs, it was the Catholic Church in the Philippines, they were civil society groups like the environmental groups, the climate groups. Every single group would have, say, anywhere from 100 to 1,000 members. Every single member, every day, we would put out, here are the 5 fact checks you can share today, and you can share them, and we give them times where it spreads the furthest. All they have to do, every single member, is share 1 fact check a day, but share it with emotion. And they cannot use anger. And we mapped this every week, and what we found was that inspiration spreads as fast as anger. Let me say that one more time. Inspiration spreads as fast as anger, right? The third layer were academic institutions. There were 8 of them. We processed the data we got from the 16 news organizations, and every week the academic institutions did a webinar or a press conference where they told our people what were the lies, what were the meta-narratives that were manipulating us, and who was benefiting from it. The last layer were 6 legal organizations, left, right, and center. Those legal organizations, you might wonder, actually Paolo asked, why legal? Because you can't have, if you don't have integrity of facts, how can you have integrity of law? Right? Law depends on facts. So these 150 groups are still together. How many years? 3 or 4 years later, we're getting ready for our midterm elections in May. And we will do the same thing. Things have changed. So I guess understand that we're doing a Faustian deal with the devil when we're on these platforms, right? So we need to build for ourselves. We need to use ourselves, our values, for the distribution. Those are the 2 things. There is content and there's distribution. In the old days, before 2014, a news organization had both. Now, it's content and distribution is technology, and that technology is manipulative. So that's the world we live in. As Catholics, organize yourselves.
Yes, and expect something of ourselves. Expect something of our kids. Ask them to do something difficult. Don't kowtow to the lowest common denominator. This stuff takes time, but excellence will eventually come through. If we do it too quickly and we fall too quickly, we're going to be in trouble. I just wrote to myself that integrity takes time. So expect things and demand things of our young people. Do not give them something too simple, because they will surprise us. And particularly when we're talking about what's happening this weekend, we're talking a lot about young people. Let's not pat them on the head, and let's give them a challenge. We are already giving them a challenge, but let's expect something of ourselves and expect something of them too.
Sorry, can I just add? I'm so sorry, I forgot this part. The Matrix Protocol chat app is up and running, and we have a Jubilee channel. The Matrix Protocol is encrypted, open source, end-to-end encrypted, right? So this way, there's nothing that is manipulating you, no algorithm. I believe, I can't remember who's running. There is both AI, which will automatically take out curses, but there are people inside the rooms right now who are on it. So our goal there, I also have to tell you, the faith channel in our Matrix chat app is the most engaged channel. Filipinos, I guess, in hard times, we need faith. And the funny thing is, in the year that the Matrix chat app has been operating, it's already been 1 year, we've only had to ban three people. The rules are very simple. Be kind. They're very simple. They're the rules we have in the real world.
Aggiungo una piccola cosa.
I may add something very quickly. This is just to underscore further what was said rather than an answer. So all the things that we just heard are bringing us onto a path perhaps we should discuss more amongst ourselves as communicators and journalists, but also in the church at large as men and women of goodwill. The digital era is something which constantly evolves, and the evolution in the digital era belongs to us, just as we are the owners of the storytelling we are talking about. So there are engineers, those who know how to develop algorithms. There are people who are building empires by exploiting our data. This is a theme that has to be addressed by the church and all men and women of goodwill, because it depends on us how to change this. So it's our task, and this is something we can do. We must speak about this, and we must understand. I mean, at least I'm quite old to have started being a journalist when there wasn't the internet. We didn't even have computers when I started working as a journalist. So I'm not that old after all. So I think that the world is changing, and we are within a huge dynamic of change that we can change ourselves, that we can change too. So the topic is not just how to be on the social media, how to be in the digital arena, but of course that is a topic, but perhaps we should think that it's like being in an environment that can be changed, converted into something else, and that's not exactly as being in a means. Not all means are good, and bad means or tools are not useful for good purposes. So bad tools or means do not allow us to reach a good goal, but they probably lead us to defeat. So we must measure this challenge that lies before us, and this is what Maria was saying about stories, delivering stories, how to tell them. But we can start telling these stories to other people through the means that we have, understanding how they work and how they're also manipulative and how they can be manipulated. And we must do that with intelligence, also being a bit smart, with an evangelical smartness. And so sharing is not easy, but it's something that can be done.
Tu volevi aggiungere qualcosa, no? Did you want to add something?
I want to add thank you to all of you for being here, for listening to us. And I am grateful for this opportunity. And I will get a chance over the next few days to showcase my organization Narrative 4, please check it out, where we get young people to step into one another's shoes and to create change in their communities through storytelling. And please come to us and ask us about that. My team is over here with their hands up in the air. They're fantastic people. And again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your faith. And thank you for your hope.
Thank you, Colum. I leave the last word to Mario, then we can have a little break and also maybe talk each other in a direct way.
Io aggiungerei.
I would add a few things about courage and difficulty, loneliness of the journalist, the witness, the storyteller. A fundamental point is that we should not leave journalists alone. We should not leave persons alone, the activists, organizers of communities, all those people whose voices are raised should never be left alone. In this Italy of ours, we have a record number of journalists who are under police escort and who are threatened by various forms of mafia organizations. And over time, when I was a chief editor at a newspaper, that every time there was a journalist in trouble, in difficulty, and they were left alone, to turn on the spotlight on this person is a good thing. Articles, presence at his or her initiatives to ensure they had a weight. All this changed the climate around them, because it's harder to go and harm somebody who's not alone, and also set up clever and intelligent, smart challenges. So ensure that everything surrounding this person is looked at and looked after, and this creates an attention game. So we need to work, because the greatest ally of misinformation is isolation and solitude. The other things you spoke about, communicating and how the church should communicate, but there is something which applies to the entirety of communication. During the time of real-time communication, there's this idea that unless we are continuously giving an opinion on everything all the time, and if we're not always following every single issue that is thrown our way, then that's not okay. Whereas as life, including professional life, is more of a marathon than a sprint, we need to pace ourselves in a slower manner. And we should not necessarily hurry or keep saying opinions one a minute. Perhaps we should speak just a little less, but say things which are significant, things that have a meaning, things that are well thought out and that may sow a seed or leave a sign. The last thing I wish to say is patience. To have patience in repeating the things which we believe have value. Patience in continuing to sow things which may apparently not immediately have a immediate feedback, because as is written, truth is patient. I met Maria about 10 years ago or more, and the first time I saw her, she was telling me about Rappler and the difficulty she encountered. The second time I saw her, she spoke about the quantities of threats per hour she received. The third time I saw her, she had just exited the Philippines after her first arrest. The fourth time I saw her, she had won the Nobel Peace Prize, and now here she is today. So truth is patient, because at the end of the day, long-term things cannot be hidden, and we need to have faith in truth. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. We will soon link up with St. Paul's, with the Pope, for Vespers that today are devoted to the ecumenical path, following the footsteps of St. Paul. A few phrases of the speech which he has given to us in advance, and it does echo what we've said. Telling a story is an invitation to undertake an experience. When the early disciples went to the Lord and asked him, "Where are you staying?" He didn't give them his home address, but he said, "Come and see." In this Jubilee, therefore, I appeal to all of you communicators throughout the world. Tell stories of hope, stories that foster life. May your storytelling also be hope-telling. When you talk about evil, leave space in order to re-sow what has been torn asunder, the dynamism of good that can repair what is broken. So, question marks. Telling the story of hope means to see the crumbs of goodness even when everything is lost, and it means hoping against hope. It means realizing that there are new blossoms in an earth covered in ashes, and it means having a gaze that transforms things and makes them become what they could be, which means to make things progress towards their destiny. As St. Paul would say, this is the good battle. Thank you for being with us during this time, and we have a little time before linking up in order to stretch our legs and maybe have a chat on a more personal basis. Thank you kindly.